The transport shuttle descended toward station terminus, and Hannah pressed her forehead against the cold window. The massive station sparkled against the void of space like a jewel. Somewhere inside that structure was the Galactic Defense Academy, the most famous military school in human territory. She touched the faded patches on her uniform sleeve, where her old unit insignia used to be. They had removed everything that connected her to New Jeju. The shuttle docked, and Hannah stepped into the arrival hall. Other cadets moved in groups, laughing and greeting each other. Their uniforms looked brand new, crisp, and perfect. Hannah's bag contained everything she owned. It wasn't much. She walked alone through the crowd, following the signs toward the main assembly hall. The hall was enormous. Thousands of seats faced a raised platform where instructors stood in perfect formation. Hannah found an empty seat near the back. Around her, cadets talked excitedly about their families, their homeworlds, their connections. A young man sitting 2 rows ahead turned to his friend and said loudly that his father commanded the 3rd Fleet. Everyone nearby seemed impressed. A tall woman in a commander's uniform stepped forward on the platform. Her name tag read Park Ji-won. The room fell silent immediately. Commander Park's voice carried across the hall without any amplification needed. She welcomed them to the academy and spoke about tradition, honor, and excellence. She said they were the future of humanity's defense. Hannah listened but said nothing. She had heard similar speeches before. After the assembly, cadets moved to their first training session. Hannah followed the group to the simulation center. The room contained dozens of combat pods where they would practice battle scenarios. An instructor explained the exercise. They would face a standard enemy assault and needed to follow Academy doctrine precisely. Their performance would be graded on adherence to protocol. Hannah climbed into her assigned pod. The simulation began, and she found herself in a virtual battlefield. Enemy fire came from multiple directions. The scenario wanted her to advance directly toward the enemy position with her squad. According to the tactical display, this was the correct response. Hannah hesitated. She had been in real firefights. She knew what happened when you charged into an ambush. Without proper cover, she moved her character to cover behind a wall instead. She watched her ammunition count and fired in controlled bursts. Other cadets in the simulation rushed forward as instructed. The simulation eliminated them one by one. Hannah held her position and waited for a better angle. She conserved her resources and took careful shots only when she had clear targets. When the simulation ended, her pod opened. Other cadets were climbing out, talking excitedly about their performances. A young man with perfect hair and an expensive watch approached her. His name tag said Yun Tai-yang. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. He said he noticed she didn't follow the attack pattern. He asked if frontier recruits didn't understand proper military tactics. Several other cadets laughed. Hannah said nothing. She walked past him toward the exit. Behind her, she heard someone else say that New Jeju defenders probably never learned real strategy. More laughter followed. She kept walking. In the review session, Commander Park pulled up Hannah's simulation on the main screen. The commander asked why she deviated from the designated approach. Hannah stood and answered in a quiet voice. She said she took cover because that's how soldiers stay alive. The commander marked something on her tablet. She said that at the academy, cadets follow doctrine. Individual thinking comes later. Hannah received a failing grade for the exercise. The rest of the day continued similarly. During tactical lectures, Hannah recognized scenarios from her actual combat experience. The instructors taught clean, organized responses. In reality, Hannah remembered chaos, screaming, and blood. When an instructor described the Valkyrie swarm as a manageable threat, Hannah's jaw tightened. Manageable. They had killed 40,000 people on her world at lunch. Hannah sat alone in the massive dining facility. The room buzzed with conversation. She watched a group of cadets at a nearby table. One of them was Kim Do-yeon, son of Fleet Admiral Kim. Everyone knew who he was. He sat at the center of attention, telling a story about visiting his father's flagship. People hung on his every word. A young woman approached Hannah's table. She had kind eyes and a worn book bag. Her name tag read Shin Hiron. She asked if the seat was taken. Hannah shook her head. Hiron sat down and opened her lunch without saying anything else. They ate in comfortable silence. After a few minutes, Hiron spoke quietly. She said she noticed Hannah's simulation. She said it made more sense than the official approach. Hannah glanced at her but didn't respond. The afternoon brought physical training. Cadets ran through obstacle courses and practiced hand-to-hand combat. Hannah moved through the exercises efficiently, but without flash. She didn't try to stand out. When they practiced combat holds, an instructor demonstrated a technique designed to break an opponent's arm. Hannah watched without expression. She had used that exact move 3 years ago on a Valkyrie drone that had breached their perimeter. She remembered the sound it made. During sparring practice, Hannah was paired with Choi Minji, whose family owned the largest shipbuilding corporation in the system. Minji wore expensive workout gear and moved with the confidence of someone who had never faced real danger. They began sparring, and Minji attacked with textbook form. Hannah's body reacted on instinct. She blocked, trapped Minji's arm, and started a counter that would have shattered bone. She stopped herself a second before contact. Minji stumbled back, eyes wide. The instructor shouted at Hannah for using excessive force. He said this was training, not actual combat. He ordered her to control herself. Hannah apologized and stepped back. Minji complained loudly that Hannah had nearly broken her arm. Other cadets stared. Hannah kept her face neutral, but inside, something cold settled in her chest. They had no idea what excessive force actually meant. That evening, Hannah found the observation deck. She stood alone at the massive window, looking out at the stars. Earth was somewhere out there, safe and protected. New Jeju was in the opposite direction, on the frontier where no one important ever looked. She traced the scar on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve. It was one of many. Burns, cuts, shrapnel wounds. Her body was a map of a war that officially never happened. The door opened behind her. Hannah didn't turn. She heard footsteps approach and then stop. It was Hiron. The other woman stood beside her, also looking out at the stars. After a long moment, Hiron spoke. She asked where Hannah had really served. Not the official record. The truth. Hannah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said she served on the frontier. Hiron waited, but Hannah didn't elaborate. Hiron nodded slowly. She said if Hannah ever wanted to talk, she would listen. Then she left. Hannah stayed at the window for hours. She watched the stars and remembered faces. Sergeant Kang Minho, who died holding a broken barricade. Private Nam Jisoo, who bled out in her arms because medical supplies ran out. Corporal An Jun-ho, who took a plasma bolt meant for Hannah. 7 months of hell while the fleet stayed home. 7 months of being told they weren't worth saving. She looked at her reflection in the window. She looked older than 22. The academy cadets seemed like children playing soldier. They talked about honor and glory like they were real things. Hannah knew better. War wasn't glorious. It was surviving one more day while friends died around you. It was learning that some lives mattered more than others to the people making decisions. Tomorrow, she would go back to classes. She would fail more simulations for not following doctrine. She would endure more dismissive looks and snide comments. But she wouldn't quit. She couldn't, because if she left, then everyone on New Jeju really did die for nothing. If she left, then the Academy could keep pretending that real war was clean and simple. Someone had to remind them. Someone had to show them that soldiers like her existed, whether they wanted to acknowledge it or not. Hana whispered to the empty observation deck. She said they had no idea what war actually was. Her reflection stared back at her, scarred and tired and unbroken. She turned away from the window and walked back to her quarters. Tomorrow would be the same as today, but she would survive it. Surviving was what she knew how to do. The morning alarm pulled Hana from a nightmare. She had been back on New Jeju, running through burning corridors while something hunted her. She sat up in her narrow bunk, breathing hard. Her roommate's bed was empty. The girl had requested a room transfer after 3 days. She said Hana's nightmares kept her awake. The Academy approved the transfer immediately. Squad assignments were posted during breakfast. Hana scanned the list and found her name under Team 7. The squad leader was Kim Do-yeon. She closed her eyes briefly. Of course it was. The universe had a sense of humor. She finished her meal and headed to the briefing room, where Team 7 would meet. Do-yeon stood at the front of the room, already acting like a commander. 4 other cadets sat around him, all from wealthy families or prestigious academies. Hana entered and took a seat at the back. Do-yeon glanced at her and frowned. He said he reviewed everyone's records. He said most of the team had excellent simulation scores. Then he looked directly at Hana. He said some members would need to work harder to meet his standards. Their first mission was a field exercise in the Academy's training grounds. The grounds were designed to look like hostile territory, with rough terrain and hidden obstacles. Team 7 needed to reach 3 objectives and return within 6 hours. Do-yeon spread out a map and explained his strategy. He planned a direct route that would hit all 3 objectives in sequence. Fast and efficient. Hana studied the map. She noticed the second objective sat in a valley with high ridges on both sides. Perfect ambush terrain. She raised her hand and Do-yeon acknowledged her with obvious reluctance. She said they should take a longer route around the valley. Do-yeon asked why. Hana said the direct route was vulnerable. Any enemy would position themselves on those ridges. Do-yeon laughed. Several other squad members joined him. He said this was an academy exercise, not some frontier skirmish. He said they used proper military tactics here, not whatever improvised methods Hana learned on the edge of nowhere. He said they would follow his plan, and that was final. Hana said nothing more. She had tried. The exercise began at dawn. Team 7 moved out in formation. Do-yeon set a quick pace, eager to post the best time. They reached the first objective easily and marked it completed. Then they headed toward the valley. Hana hung back slightly, watching the ridges. Something felt wrong. The instructors wouldn't make this too easy. They were halfway through the valley when the ambush triggered. Automated turrets hidden on the ridges opened fire with simulation rounds. Paint markers exploded across 3 squad numbers, marking them as eliminated. Do-yeon shouted for everyone to take cover. The team scattered. Hana had already moved behind a large rock formation before the first shot fired. Do-yeon tried to rally the remaining members, but the turrets had perfect positions. Every time someone moved, they got marked. Within 5 minutes, only Hana and 1 other cadet remained active. The other cadet panicked and ran. A turret marked him immediately. Hana stayed behind her cover and didn't move. She counted the turret firing patterns, watching for gaps. There, she moved during a reload cycle and made it to better cover. The exercise ended when time ran out. Back at the briefing room, Do-yeon was furious. He blamed everyone except himself. He said the team didn't follow his orders properly. When he got to Hannah, he said she should have provided covering fire instead of hiding. Hannah pointed out that she was the only one who didn't get eliminated. Doyan said that didn't matter. She didn't help the team. She was selfish. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. The nightmare came again, but this time it was more than a dream. It was a memory forcing its way back. She was 19 years old again, standing in the command bunker on New Jeju. Commander Park had just received a message. The fleet wasn't coming. New Jeju was on its own. She remembered Sergeant Kang Minho gathering the remaining defenders. They had maybe 200 combat-capable personnel left from an original garrison of 800. The Valkyrie swarm had surrounded their position. Kang said they would hold as long as possible. He said reinforcements were coming. But Hannah had seen the message. She knew no one was coming. She didn't tell the others. What was the point? The memory shifted. 3 weeks later, the swarm broke through the eastern perimeter. Hannah was helping evacuate civilians to the underground shelters when she heard the screaming. She ran toward the sound and found Kang. He was on the ground, surrounded by Valkyrie drones. The creatures were tearing him apart. Hannah raised her rifle, but her ammunition counter showed 0. She had been out for days, making every shot count with salvaged energy cells that barely held a charge. Kang saw her. He shouted for her to run. She didn't run. She grabbed a piece of broken metal pipe and charged forward. She didn't remember much after that, just hitting and hitting until the drones stopped moving. When she finally looked down, Kang was dead. One of the drones had severed his throat. She knelt in his blood and held his hand until it went cold. Hannah woke up gasping. Her sheets were soaked with sweat. She got up and went to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. In the mirror, she looked at the scar on her shoulder. A Valkyrie weapon had burned through her armor there. The academy doctors had asked about it during her medical exam. She told them it was an accident during training. They believed her because her records were sealed. They didn't know she had killed 17 Valkyrie in hand-to-hand combat. They didn't know she had pulled wounded soldiers from collapsed buildings while plasma fire rained down. They didn't know anything real about her. The next day brought combat training. The instructor was Commander Park. She demonstrated various holds and strikes, explaining their applications. Then she showed them a killing technique designed for close-quarters combat. It involved trapping an opponent's arm and using their momentum to break their neck. The instructor said this was only for extreme situations. Hannah watched without expression. She had used that exact move on a Valkyrie that got past their barricades. It worked on them too. When they paired off for practice. Hannah was matched with a cadet named Beat Junho. He was friendly enough, treating the exercise like a game. They worked through the techniques slowly. Then Commander Park called for full-speed demonstrations. Junho came at Hannah with a practice attack. Her body reacted automatically. She blocked, pivoted, and had him in a submission hold before her conscious mind caught up. Junho tapped out quickly, surprised. Commander Park watched carefully, but said nothing. After training, Hiring found Hannah in the locker room. She asked if Hannah wanted to study together. They had a major exam coming on military history. Hannah agreed, and they met later in the library. Hiram pulled out her notes, organized and detailed. Hannah had notes too, but they were sparse. She already knew most of this material from experience. They studied quietly for a while. Then Hiram asked a question. She said the textbook described Valkyrie swarm as a minor threat that humanity contained quickly. She asked if that was accurate. Hannah's pen stopped moving. After a long pause, she said the textbook was written by people who never faced the swarm. Hiram waited for more, but Hannah didn't elaborate. The major exam came 3 days later. The test covered significant military conflicts from the past 50 years. Hannah moved through most questions easily. Then she reached a section about frontier conflicts. One question asked about the Battle of New Jeju. The provided answer choices made her hands shake. The question stated that New Jeju was successfully defended with minimal casualties through superior tactics and rapid fleet response. That was the official story. That was the lie. Hannah stared at the question. She knew the right answer for the test. She also knew the truth. 40,000 people died. The fleet never came. They held for 7 months on hope and desperation before the swarm finally withdrew for reasons humanity still didn't understand. Hannah marked the official answer. She had to. But something inside her cracked a little more. She finished the exam and left quickly. She went straight to the observation deck, her refuge. She stood at the window and tried to breathe normally. The lies were everywhere, embedded in every system. The academy taught cadets that New Jeju was a victory. They taught them the fleet was always there when needed. They taught them war was clean and organized. Commander Park found her there an hour later. The instructor stood beside her, looking out at the stars. Park spoke quietly. She said she noticed Hannah's reaction during combat training. She said she recognized certain things in how Hannah moved. Park said she had served on the frontier 2 years ago. She saw action on 3 different colonies before transferring to the academy. She understood what it was like to have experience that no one acknowledged. Hannah asked why Park stayed at the academy if she knew the truth. Park said someone needed to teach these cadets reality before they got people killed with their perfect theories. She said change happened slowly from inside institutions. She said Hannah being here mattered, even if it didn't feel that way. Then Park left. Hannah stayed at the window as they shifted to night on the station's artificial cycle. She thought about Kong and all the others. She thought about the fleet that never came. She thought about the official history that erased their sacrifice. New Jeju wasn't even mentioned in the Academy's memorial hall. It was like her war never happened. She pulled out her personal tablet and opened a file she kept hidden. It contained names. Every person from New Jeju she could remember. Defenders and civilians both. She added names sometimes when memories surfaced. The list was long. Too long. She read through them slowly, saying each name quietly. It was the only memorial they had. Her dot somewhere in the academy. Cadets laughed and studied and dreamed of glory. They wore perfect uniforms and had perfect futures planned. They thought war was simulation scores and tactical theory. Hannah knew better. War was holding your friend's hand while they died. War was running out of ammunition and fighting with whatever you could find. War was being told you weren't worth saving. War was surviving when everyone else didn't and carrying that weight forever. She closed the file and stood up. Tomorrow would bring more classes, more simulations, more dismissive looks. But she would endure it. For Kong, for all the names in her file. Someone had to remember them. Someone had to carry their truth forward. Even if the academy never wanted to hear it. The announcement came during morning formation. Commandant Choi Sang-wook himself addressed the assembled cadets. He spoke about the Crucible, the academy's most demanding test. It was a week-long combat simulation on a decommissioned station in orbit. Teams would face continuous scenarios with no breaks, no second chances. Performance in the Crucible determined future command positions and assignments. It was the test that separated real leaders from everyone else. After the announcement, squad leaders received their team rosters. Kim Do-yeon stood in the common area, reviewing the list with satisfaction. He had pulled strings to get the best cadets assigned to him. Yoon Tae-yang, the tactical genius. Choi Minji, top of the class in strategy. 3 others from prestigious backgrounds. Then he reached the rejected cadets, the ones no squad leader wanted. His face fell. Hana found her name on the reject list. Team 14. She was grouped with Shin Hairin, Baek Junho, who had washed out of pilot training, and Lim Sora, who excelled at technical work, but struggled with physical requirements. They met in a small briefing room, away from the main preparation areas. Junho looked defeated already. Sora stared at her tablet, avoiding eye contact. Only Hairin seemed calm. Doyan passed the room and stopped to look in. He smiled and said something about trying not to embarrass the academy out there. Several cadets with him laughed. They walked away, already confident in their victory. Junho slumped in his chair. He said they had no chance. They were the worst performers, grouped together to fail quietly while the real cadets competed for glory. Hana stood up. She said they had 1 week to prepare, and they wouldn't waste it feeling sorry for themselves. Junho protested. He said they couldn't compete with Dayan's team or any of the other elite squads. Hana asked if he wanted to fail or if he wanted to learn how to actually survive. Her tone carried something that made everyone look up. Junho asked what she meant. Hana said she would train them, but not the academy way. She would teach them how frontier defenders fought, how soldiers survived when no one was coming to help. Sora asked skeptically what a failed cadet could teach them. Hana met her eyes and said quietly that she had survived 7 months of continuous combat while the fleet stayed home. The room went silent. Hairin was the first to speak. She said she was in. They started training that evening in an unused section of the facility. Hana taught them to move silently, to use terrain instead of fighting against it, to think like prey before becoming predators. She showed them how to conserve energy and ammunition, how to identify ambush positions, how to survive rather than win gloriously. Junho struggled at first. He kept trying to do things the textbook way. Hana made him stop. She asked how many of his instructors had survived a real war. Junho had no answer. The week passed quickly. While other teams practiced elaborate assault strategies, Team 14 learned to hide, to wait, to strike only when victory was certain. Sora turned out to have a natural talent for reading terrain and finding weaknesses. Juno, once he stopped trying to be heroic, proved excellent at planning careful approaches. Hairin absorbed everything, like she had been waiting her whole life to learn this. They became something different from the other teams. Quieter, more focused. The day of the Crucible arrived. All teams boarded transports to the decommissioned station. The structure was massive, a maze of corridors, chambers, and hazards. Each team received basic equipment and starting positions. The simulation would run continuously for 7 days. Teams earned points by completing objectives and eliminating opponents. Medical stations provided healing for injuries, but they were few and dangerous to reach. The simulation began. Team 14 started in a storage area deep in the station. Other teams immediately pushed forward, seeking early objectives and easy points. Hana held her team back. She made them watch and listen first. Through the walls, they heard weapons fire and shouting. Someone screamed. The simulation was far more brutal than the practice scenarios. Doyen's elite team charged toward the first major objective, a control room worth significant points. They moved in perfect formation, exactly as trained. They rounded a corner and walked directly into a prepared ambush. The simulation's automated defenders opened fire from elevated positions. 3 of Doyen's team were eliminated in seconds. Doyen himself took a hit to the leg, reducing his mobility. His perfect plan fell apart in the first hour. Team 14 moved slowly through maintenance tunnels. Hana led them on paths other teams ignored. The routes were longer but safer. When they found an objective, Hannah made them study it first. They watched for 20 minutes before Sora identified the trap. The objective was bait, designed to lure teams into a kill zone. They marked its location and moved on. Let someone else spring the trap. 2 days passed. Other teams grew desperate, taking risks for points. Team 14 stayed patient. They completed small objectives that others overlooked. They scavenged equipment from eliminated teams. When they encountered another squad, Hana's training showed its value. Team 14 didn't fight unless they had every advantage. They retreated when outnumbered, attacked only from superior positions. They fought like survivors, not heroes. On the third day, they encountered what remained of Doyan's team. He had 2 cadets left, both injured and low on supplies. Doyan saw Team 14 and demanded they share their resources. He said it was protocol to support other academy teams. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. She said in real war, no one would save him just because they asked nicely. She said they needed to learn that lesson now, not when real lives depended on it. She left Doyan with 1 medical kit and kept moving. Behind them, Doyan shouted that she would face consequences for refusing a superior officer's order. The simulation shifted on day 5. New parameters loaded. The automated defenders changed their behavior patterns. Squads that had learned the AI's routines suddenly found themselves facing something different. The simulation was now mimicking Valkyrie swarm tactics. Random aggression mixed with sudden retreats. Ambushes from unexpected angles. Group attacks that ignored casualties. Several teams panicked. Their training hadn't prepared them for an enemy that didn't follow human logic. Hana's hands started shaking when she recognized the attack patterns. Her breathing quickened. Hiron noticed and asked if she was okay. Hannah didn't answer immediately. She was back on New Jeju, watching the swarm surge through broken barricades. She heard Kao's screams. She felt the heat of plasma burning her shoulder. Her vision blurred. Junho shook her shoulder gently. The simulation was advancing. They needed orders. Hannah forced herself back to the present. She knew these patterns. She had survived them before. She began calling out instructions with absolute certainty. When the swarm formation pushed from the left, she had them retreat, right, then circle back. When the defenders tried to surround them, she led the team through a path that seemed blocked but actually had a maintenance access. She anticipated every move because she had lived through this nightmare. Her team followed without question now. They saw something in Hana they hadn't seen before. This wasn't a struggling cadet anymore. This was a soldier who had fought things that made grown cadets freeze in fear. They moved through the chaos while other teams collapsed. Team 7, once the elite squad, was completely eliminated trying a frontal assault. Team 4 lost everyone but their leader, who hid in a storage closet until time ran out. The final day brought the ultimate test. All remaining teams received the same objective: secure the command center. It was worth massive points, but everyone knew it would be the most dangerous location. Several teams formed temporary alliances. Hannah kept Team 14 separate. She said they would approach alone carefully. Sora asked if they should ally with others for strength. Hana said alliances fell apart when resources ran low. Better to rely on people you trusted. They reached the command center area through service tunnels. Above them, they heard an intense firefight. Multiple teams were locked in combat, fighting each other as much as the simulation defenders. Hana waited. She made her team rest and conserve energy. Junho asked why they weren't joining the fight. Hana said they would let the others exhaust themselves first. Survivors didn't rush into battle. Survivors waited for the right moment. Hours passed. The fighting above diminished. Hannah led her team up carefully. The command center was a scene of carnage. Eliminated cadets lay everywhere, their gear scattered. The few defenders remaining were damaged and low on ammunition. Team 14 moved in with practiced coordination. They secured the command center with minimal engagement. When the simulation ended an hour later, they held the most valuable objective. The rankings posted immediately. Team 14 had scored the highest total in 20 years of Academy Crucible history. They had completed more objectives than any other team and survived with all members intact. The elite teams that everyone expected to dominate had been eliminated early. The rejects had won. They emerged from the simulation pods exhausted and covered in sweat. Other cadets stared at them with shock and confusion. How had the worst team achieved the best score? Doyan stood nearby, his face twisted with anger and embarrassment. He started to say something, but Commander Park cut him off. She told all teams to report for debriefing dot in the debriefing hall. Commandant Choi stood at the podium. He reviewed each team's performance. When he reached Team 14, he paused. He said their approach violated numerous doctrinal standards. They avoided engagement when protocol demanded action. They prioritized survival over glory. They fought like defenders, not attackers. Then his tone changed. He said perhaps it was time the Academy remembered that soldiers who survived wars were more valuable than soldiers who died heroically. He said Team 14 would be studied as an example going forward. Hana sat quietly during the praise. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired. The swarm simulation had pulled up memories she worked hard to keep buried. That night, while others celebrated, she returned to the observation deck alone. Hiren found her there. Hiren said nothing at first, just stood beside her. Finally, Hiren asked where Hana really learned to fight like that. Hana was quiet for a long time. Then she said New Jiju. Hiren nodded slowly. She said she looked it up. The official records said it was a minor battle. Hana laughed bitterly. She said 40,000 people wasn't minor. The celebration continued elsewhere in the academy. Team 14 had proved something important. But Hana knew the real test was just beginning. Tomorrow, questions would come. People would want to know how a struggling cadet suddenly displayed combat expertise. Her sealed records wouldn't stay sealed forever. The truth about New Jeju would surface. She had changed something in the academy, whether she meant to or not. The rejects had become victors. The dismissed soldier had become someone they couldn't ignore. And that meant everything was about to get much more complicated. The summons came 2 days after the Crucible results were posted. A message appeared on Hana's tablet. Report to Commandant's office immediately. She had been expecting this. She put on her cleanest uniform and walked through the academy halls. Other cadets watched her pass. Some with respect now, others with suspicion. Everyone wanted to know how she had really learned to fight like that. The Commandant's office sat at the top of the administrative tower. Hana had never been there before. The secretary told her to enter. Inside, Commandant Choi Sang-wook sat behind a large desk. Commander Park stood by the window. Both their expressions were unreadable. Hana stood at attention and saluted. The Commandant gestured for her to sit. He activated a holodisplay, and Hana's file appeared. Not the basic cadet file everyone saw. The full military record. The one marked classified. The Commandant began reading aloud. Battle of New Jeju. 276 days of continuous combat. Sole surviving member of the 3rd Colonial Defense Regiment. Recommended for the Silver Star of Valor. Recommendation denied. Hana said nothing. She kept her eyes forward, military discipline holding her steady. The Commandant asked if she knew why the medal was denied. Hana said she assumed it was political. The Commandant nodded. He said the medal would have drawn attention to New Jeju. Attention meant questions. Questions meant investigations. Investigations would reveal that the Galactic Defense Fleet had ships available, but chose not to respond. New Jeju was deemed not worth the resource expenditure. Commander Park spoke then. She said the political officers decided it was cleaner to let New Jeju fall and classify the records. They wrote it up as a minor skirmish successfully contained. They sealed the files of survivors so no one could contradict the official story. They thought they had buried the truth. Then Hana applied to the academy. The commandant stood and walked to the window. He said he was one of 5 admirals who argued for sending relief to New Jeju. He lost that vote. He watched on scanners as the colony fought for months without help. He saw the casualty reports climb. When the swarm finally withdrew, and they found one defender still alive from the main garrison, he tried to have her honored properly. The political officers blocked him. They said acknowledging her service would acknowledge the abandonment. He turned back to face Hannah. He said when her academy application crossed his desk, he personally pushed it through. He knew some cadets would dismiss her. He knew she would struggle against institutional prejudice. But he also knew the academy needed to be reminded of what frontier defenders faced. He said she represented everything the core worlds wanted to forget. That was exactly why she needed to be there. Hannah's hands were shaking now. She asked why he was telling her this. The commandant said her sealed records had been accessed. Too many people were asking questions after the crucible. The story would break soon. He wanted her to hear the truth from him first. He wanted her to know she had at least one ally in the command structure. Commander Park added that the cadets needed to see the footage. They needed to understand what war really cost. She asked if Hana would permit them to show classified recordings from New Jeju during a mandatory assembly. Hannah's breath caught. She asked what footage. Park said the colony had automated defense cameras. Some survived. The recordings showed what the garrison faced. What Hana faced. Hana felt cold. She didn't want anyone to see those images. She didn't want them to see Kang torn apart. She didn't want them to see civilians burning. She didn't want them to see her covered in blood, fighting with broken weapons while the sky burned. But she understood why it mattered. The academy taught clean war. The cadets needed to see the truth. She gave permission. The commandant dismissed her. As she reached the door, he spoke again. He said she changed the academy just by being there. He said what she did in the crucible would be studied for years. He said frontier defenders everywhere would hear that one of their own not only survived, but excelled. She had given them something they desperately needed, proof that they mattered. The mandatory assembly was scheduled for the next day. Word spread quickly. Everyone knew it was about Hana. The rumor mill worked overtime. Some said she was a war criminal being exposed. Others claimed she was actually a special forces operative. Doyun told anyone who would listen that Hana had clearly cheated somehow and was being expelled. Hana sat in her quarters that evening. Hiren came by with food. She said Hana needed to eat. Hana stared at the meal, but couldn't bring herself to touch it. Hiren sat beside her. She said whatever happened tomorrow, Hana had friends now. She said Team 14 stood together. Hana managed a weak smile. She thanked Hiren and asked her to leave. She needed to be alone. That night brought the worst nightmares yet. She was back in the bunker, holding the dying. She was back in the corridors, running from the swarm. She was back in the moment when she realized no help was coming. She woke up gasping, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. She gave up on sleep and sat at her desk until dawn. The assembly hall was packed. Every cadet, every instructor, every administrator. Hana sat in the front row with Team 14. She felt thousands of eyes on her back. The commandant took the podium. He said the academy prided itself on producing excellent officers. He said they taught strategy, tactics, leadership. But they had failed to teach one crucial lesson: the cost of their decisions on those who fought without support. He activated the main display. The screen showed a planet from orbit. New Jeju. Beautiful and green. Then the image shifted to ground level. A colony settlement. People going about their daily lives. The commandant's voice narrated. He said this was 3 years ago. Population, 240,000. Defense garrison, 1,000 personnel with outdated equipment. Strategic value, minimal. Then the swarm arrived. The footage jumped forward. The settlement was burning. Bodies lay in the streets. The camera showed defenders trying to hold a barricade. The commandant identified units. 3rd Colonial Defense Regiment, led by Sergeant Kong Minho, 200 soldiers. The footage showed them fighting. It showed them dying. The swarm came in waves, relentless and inhuman. Behind Hana, cadets started reacting. Someone gasped. Someone else left quickly, probably to be sick. The footage continued. Days passed in the recording. The defenders got fewer. Their weapons ran out. They fought with improvised tools. The camera showed a young woman, 19 years old, pulling a wounded civilian to safety while plasma fire rained around her. The commandant said that was Private Lee Hana, age 19. The footage showed the worst moments. Kang dying while Hana fought to reach him. Hana holding someone's hand while they bled out. Hana with a broken arm still fighting because there was no one else left. Week after week. Month after month. The commandant's voice remained steady, but anger crept in. He said Fleet Command had ships available. He said they chose not to respond. He said New Jeju was written off. Choi Minji was crying audibly now. Several other cadets had left the hall. Those remaining sat in stunned silence. The footage showed the final week. Only a handful of defenders remained. The camera caught Hana, barely recognizable under dirt and blood, leading the last few civilians into underground shelters. Then the swarm withdrew. No one knew why. They just left. When relief finally arrived 2 weeks later, they found one garrison member alive. Private Lee Hana. The footage ended. The hall was silent. Commandant Choi let the silence stretch. Then he spoke. He said this was the reality beyond their simulations. This was what happened when doctrine mattered more than lives. This was why officers needed to understand that every decision had a human cost. He said Private Lee Hana survived 276 days of what they just witnessed. She survived and then applied to their academy. He asked them to consider what that meant. Commander Park took the podium next. She said the academy had failed Hana. They dismissed her experience. They marked her down for tactics that kept her alive when doctrine would have killed her. They let other cadets mock her for being from the frontier. She said that ended today. She said from now forward, frontier combat veterans would be recognized for their experience, not punished for it. The commandant dismissed the assembly. Cadets filed out slowly, most in shock. Hana sat unmoving. She had just watched her trauma displayed for thousands of people. She felt exposed and raw. Hiren put a hand on her shoulder. Junho sat down on her other side. Sora stood behind her. Team 14 surrounded her without words. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. Yoon Ta-yang, the tactical genius who once mocked her, approached in the library. He stood awkwardly before speaking. He said he was sorry. He said he had studied war his entire life, but never understood what it truly was until today. He asked if Hana would teach him. He said he wanted to learn from someone who actually survived what he had only read about. Doyan was harder to face. He cornered Hannah in the corridor. She expected anger. Instead, he looked uncertain. He said his father commanded the Third Fleet during New Jeju. He said his father was one of the admirals who voted not to send help. He said he grew up believing his father made the right tactical decision. Now he didn't know what to believe. He asked if Hannah hated him for his father's choice. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. She said she didn't hate him. She said she hated a system that let people die because they weren't important enough to save. She said she hated officers who cared more about strategic value than human lives. But Do-yeon wasn't his father. He was a cadet who could choose to be better. She walked away without saying more. That evening, Hannah received dozens of messages. Some from other cadets asking to train with her. Some from instructors saying they would incorporate frontier tactics into curriculum. Some from people she never met, thanking her for surviving and for coming to the academy. She read them all but responded to none. She went to the observation deck. Commander Park found her there. Park said the political officers were furious. They wanted the commandant removed for exposing classified material. But the story had already spread beyond the academy. Frontier colonies were celebrating. Senators were demanding investigations. The cover-up was unraveling. Park said Hannah had a choice now. She could accept an immediate commission, skip the rest of academy training, take a command position far from the politics. Or she could stay and graduate properly. Staying meant enduring more scrutiny, more questions, more pressure. Leaving meant escaping all of it. Hannah didn't hesitate. She said she would stay. She said if she left now, nothing would really change. The academy would eventually go back to dismissing frontier soldiers. The core worlds would keep pretending the frontier didn't matter. She said someone needed to be there, visible and undeniable, proving that defenders like her existed and deserved respect. She said she would graduate properly and force them to acknowledge it. Commander Park smiled. She said she expected that answer. She said the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she promised Hannah wouldn't walk it alone. The academy was changing whether it wanted to or not, and Hannah was the catalyst for that change. Hannah looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, New Jeju still existed, a scarred world with mass graves and memorials. She had survived when everyone else died. She had carried their memory alone for 3 years. Now thousands of people knew their names, knew what they faced, knew they were abandoned and fought anyway. It wasn't justice, but it was acknowledgement. Sometimes that was enough to keep going. The weeks following the assembly brought profound changes to the academy. New courses appeared in the curriculum: frontier combat tactics, resource scarcity management, unconventional warfare. Instructors who had actual combat experience were brought in to supplement the theoretical professors. The simulation programs were updated to include scenarios where help wouldn't arrive and doctrine wouldn't save you. The academy was learning, slowly and painfully, that war wasn't what their textbooks claimed. Hannah found herself at the center of this transformation. Cadets who once ignored her now sought her guidance. She held informal training sessions in the evenings, teaching small groups the survival skills she learned on New Jeju. She taught them to move quietly, to think defensively, to value life over glory. Some cadets couldn't handle her methods and dropped out. Others embraced them desperately, understanding they might someday face real combat. Yoon Taeyang became her most dedicated student. The tactical genius spent hours reviewing his theories against her practical experience. He admitted that half his celebrated strategies would get people killed in actual battle. Together, they began developing new tactical frameworks that combined sound theory with survival reality. Commander Park watched these sessions with approval. This was exactly what the academy needed, but not everyone welcomed the changes. A group of traditionalist instructors complained to the commandant. They said the academy was becoming too focused on defensive tactics. They argued that aggressive doctrine-based approaches won wars, not the cautious methods Hannah taught. The commandant listened to their concerns and then asked a simple question: how many of them had survived combat where reinforcements never arrived? None had. He dismissed their complaints. The announcement came 5 months after Hannah's story became public. The academy would host its final examination. The war games. Real military officers would attend as evaluators. Cadets would face scenarios designed by combat veterans. This would be the ultimate test of whether the academy's changes had created better officers or just more cautious ones. Among the listed evaluators was a name that made Hannah's blood run cold: Captain Im Seok. Captain Im Seok had commanded the Third Fleet during New Jeju. He was one of the officers who voted against sending help. Hannah had never met him, but she knew his name from the classified reports. He was the man who decided her world wasn't worth saving. Now he would evaluate her performance. The universe had a cruel sense of irony. Team 14 prepared intensively. They had gained 3 new members, transfers, who specifically requested to join them after watching their Crucible performance. The expanded team trained as a cohesive unit. Junho had become a skilled tactician. Sora could read any terrain instantly. Tyron moved like a ghost through hostile territory. They were ready. The war games began with an assembly. All the evaluators stood on stage in their dress uniforms, decorated with medals and ribbons. Captain Im Seok stood at the center, tall and distinguished. He looked exactly like what he was, a successful fleet officer who had never faced the consequences of his comfortable decisions. The commandant introduced each evaluator. When he reached Captain Im, polite applause filled the hall. Hannah didn't clap. She sat with her hands in her lap, watching him. The first scenario was straightforward: assault a fortified position. Most teams approached it as a standard military operation. They used doctrine-perfect formations and overwhelming force strategies. The evaluators' defenses shredded them. Team after team failed or succeeded with massive casualties. When Team 14's turn came, they did something different. Hannah split her team into 3 elements. One created a diversion. Another moved through what appeared to be impassable terrain to flank the position. The third waited patiently for the defenders to respond to the diversion, then struck at the weakened section. They took the position with 0 casualties. The evaluators looked surprised. Captain Im frowned. The scenarios continued over the next 2 days. Colony defense, resource shortage, hostile environment survival, equipment failure recovery. Each scenario revealed the gap between academy training and combat reality. The teams that tried to follow pure doctrine struggled or failed. Teams that adapted, that thought like survivors, succeeded. Team 14 consistently ranked in the top 3. The turning point came on day 4. The scenario was announced as a standard operation: defend a colony until reinforcements arrived. Teams took their positions confidently. They set up proper defensive lines, established fields of fire, coordinated communication networks. Everything by the book. The simulation began. The enemy attacked in waves. Teams held their positions well initially. Then casualties mounted. Ammunition ran low. Equipment failed under sustained fire. Teams started requesting the reinforcements they were promised. The simulation timer showed reinforcements would arrive in 6 hours. The teams just needed to hold out. But Hannah recognized this scenario. She had lived it. She watched the other teams fighting bravely, trusting that help was coming. She made a different call. She told Team 14 to assume reinforcements would never arrive. They needed to survive indefinitely with what they had. Her team looked at her in confusion. The scenario briefing clearly stated reinforcements were coming. Hannah said quietly That briefings lied sometimes. Team 14 shifted strategies immediately. They abandoned indefensible positions. They cached supplies in multiple locations. They set up fallback points. They prepared for a long siege rather than a short fight. Other teams thought they were panicking or giving up. Dian's team, fighting nearby, called them cowards over the communication network. 6 hours passed. The simulation announced a system update. The promised reinforcements were delayed. New arrival time, 12 hours. Teams that had exhausted resources trying to hold positions suddenly faced disaster. Several were eliminated. The survivors tried to adapt, but they had already committed to strategies based on the original timeline. 12 hours passed. Another update. Reinforcements delayed further due to complications. New estimate, 24 hours. More teams collapsed. Resources were gone. Defensive positions were overrun. Casualties mounted. The simulation was brutal. Teams that had fought bravely were being destroyed through no fault of their own, except trusting the briefing. Team 14, prepared for exactly this situation, continued fighting effectively. They rotated personnel to manage fatigue. They rationed supplies carefully. They fell back when necessary and held when possible. They treated every hour as if it might be the last, but they never stopped surviving. The scenario ran for 3 full days. The promised reinforcements never came. Only 2 teams survived to the end. Team 14 and one other team led by Yun Taiyang, who had learned from Hana's teachings. Every other team was eliminated, many while still believing help would arrive soon. The simulation ended, and shocked cadets emerged from their pods. The debriefing hall was tense. Evaluators sat at a raised table, reviewing performance data. Captain Im Seok spoke first. He said the scenario was designed to test adaptability under changing conditions. He said most teams performed adequately until the timeline changed. Then he focused on Team 14. He said their approach was defeatist. They abandoned positions that doctrine said to hold. They fought like they expected to lose rather than win. Hana stood up. She asked permission to speak. The commandant nodded. Hana's voice was controlled, but her words cut like knives. She said Team 14 fought like soldiers who understood that briefings sometimes lied. She said they fought like people who knew that promised help didn't always arrive. She said they prioritized survival over glory because dead soldiers couldn't complete missions. She said they fought like New Jeju. The hall went silent. Captain Im's face hardened. He said New Jeju was an unfortunate situation, but strategically unsound to defend. Hana stepped forward. She said 40,000 people weren't a situation. They were human beings that officers like him wrote off. She said he sat in a comfortable fleet command, making strategic calculations while real people died screaming. She said he had never faced the consequences of his decisions, and that's why he couldn't understand Team 14's approach. Captain M stood, clearly angry now. He said she was out of line. He said military decisions required considering the bigger picture, not emotional attachments to individual colonies. He said officers needed to make hard choices. Hana met his eyes without flinching. She said there was a difference between hard choices and cowardly ones. She said abandoning people to die because saving them was inconvenient wasn't strategy. It was betrayal. Commandant Choi intervened before Captain Im could respond. He said this was why the evaluation scenario was designed as it was. He said too many cadets learned to trust systems that sometimes failed. He said officers needed to prepare their people for worst cases, not best cases. He said perhaps it was time the military learned from soldiers who survived what its strategies abandoned. Commander Park added that every cadet should study Team 14's approach. She said they demonstrated something crucial, the difference between doctrine and reality. She said wars weren't won by perfect execution of plans. They were won by soldiers who adapted when plans failed. She said that lesson came from the frontier, from defenders who fought without support, and the academy was better for learning it. It thought the evaluators conferred quietly. Captain M clearly disagreed with something, but was outvoted. The final rankings posted. Team 14 placed second overall. Yoon Taiyang's team placed first. But both teams received special commendations for tactical innovation and survival excellence. It wasn't the victory Doyon had dreamed of, but it was something more important. Validation that their approach mattered. Graduation came 2 weeks later. The ceremony was traditional and formal. Cadets in perfect uniforms marched across the stage to receive their commissions. Hannah walked with Team 14. When the commandant called her name, she stepped forward. He didn't just hand her the insignia. He pinned it himself and whispered so only she could hear. "You changed this place more than you know." After the ceremony, Hannah received her assignment, training officer for Frontier Defense Forces. Not a prestigious core world posting. Not a fleet command position. But exactly where she wanted to be. She would train the next generation of frontier defenders. She would teach them to survive when no one was coming to help. She would make sure no colony ever felt as abandoned as New Jeju. Others received similar assignments. Hiren requested Frontier Medical Corps. Junho asked for Frontier Patrol duty. Sora wanted Frontier Technical Support. They weren't the only ones. Dozens of cadets, inspired by what they learned from Hana, requested Frontier postings. The Frontier had always been where the Academy sent failures and misfits. Now it was where some of the best cadets wanted to serve. Hana stood in the observation deck one last time. She looked toward the Frontier, toward the worlds the Corps ignored. Hiren joined her, then Juno, then Sora. Others came too. Cadets she had trained. Cadets who learned that glory mattered less than survival. Cadets who understood that the forgotten places needed defenders most. Yoon Taiyang approached. He said he received assignment to tactical development. He would work on creating better strategies for frontier defense. He asked Hannah to consult with him regularly. She agreed. Doyoung came next. He had requested transfer to Frontier Logistics. He said someone needed to make sure supplies actually reached the colonies that needed them. He said his father disagreed with his choice. He didn't care anymore. Commander Park found them gathered there. She said reports were coming in from across the frontier. Colonies heard that Academy cadets were requesting frontier postings. Defenders heard that their tactics were being taught in the most prestigious military school. Survivors heard that one of their own not only graduated, but changed how the military viewed them. Morale on the frontier was higher than it had been in decades. Hana thought about Sergeant Kong and all the others. They died believing no one cared about frontier worlds. They died thinking the Corps saw them as expendable. She couldn't bring them back. She couldn't undo their deaths. But she could make sure their sacrifice meant something. She could make sure future defenders knew they weren't forgotten. She could make sure no colony ever fought alone while help stayed home. The group stood together, looking at the stars. Hannah spoke quietly. She said out there, people thought no one was coming to help them. She said it was time to prove them wrong. She said they were going to the places that mattered, not the places that were comfortable. She said they would be the defenders the frontier deserved. They weren't the Academy's elite anymore, the ones who came from wealth and privilege. They were something better. They were soldiers who understood what war actually cost. They were officers who valued lives over strategy. They were defenders who refused to let anyone fight alone. They were humanity at its best, imperfect, scarred, but absolutely unwilling to abandon each other. Hana left the observation deck with her team behind her. She carried the weight of New Jeju still. She always would. But now she also carried something else. Hope. Hope that the system could change. Hope that the forgotten could be remembered. Hope that next time a colony called for help, someone would answer. She survived real war. She survived the academy. Now she would make sure others survived too. That was enough. That had to be enough. And somehow, walking toward her future with friends beside her, it finally felt like it was.